Dr. Bera.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank the witnesses. Dr. Rand, was I correct in hearing you say we've been involved in 25 years of continuous engagement in Iraq?
To clarify, on and off for 25 years. I was counting the time at the beginning of the Gulf War, which is, we're coming on the 25th anniversary of the invasion.
Great.
So
on and off. And as we look at this current engagement, it's accurate to say we're not talking about years, we're talking about prolonged periods of time, perhaps decades. So no one disagrees with that. Dr. Brennan, in answer to my colleague from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline, when asked about who can provide the numbers of ground troops in order to maintain stability, to create that open space, I think you characterized it as our allies in the region have limited capabilities, limited ground troops, and those ground troops largely are tied up within their own countries. Is that an accurate assessment?
They are tied up, but that doesn't mean that they can't provide some. But what I think we have to have is reasonable expectations about what they can do based upon their own internal security interests.
So in this larger debate, much of the debate is what the United States involvement is, what our troops' involvement is, and no one's discounting that ISIL is, these are monsters, these are despicable individuals, these are folks that are distorting a religion, and we do have national security threats, and we do have an interest in ridding the region of this ideology. But it's not going to be easy, and it is going to be prolonged, and it is going to take decades. And I disagree with my colleague, Mr. Salmons. I do think it is our responsibility as members of Congress to be engaged in defining the context of what this engagement looks like, not in prosecuting this. That is up to our military commanders, our diplomats, and so forth, but in engaging, and I think the public wants us to be engaged in this definition, so I think that is a good thing. This is not going to be easy, and there clearly is a scenario. I think, Ambassador Jeffrey, you talked about some of the bad guys here, Assad, Iran, others, but you can clearly see a scenario where you defeat ISIL, you drive them out, where you see this change from Iran to a Shia-dominated Iraq, to Assad, to Hezbollah, to Hamas, which we have to be conscious that that is one outcome here, which is not an outcome that I desire. I think it's an outcome that puts some of our closest allies in a very precarious position, and maybe even creates a worse scenario in this. So as we members of Congress engage in this debate, we have to be very conscious of all possible scenarios. Ambassador Jeffrey, you touched on the lessons from Vietnam that I can imagine a ground campaign in Iraq with Shia militia, with Iraqi forces, with Kurdish fighters, a prolonged ground campaign that drives out Iraq. But the real challenge here is what happens in that bordering country in Syria. There isn't a moderate Syrian force that can cut off that line of retreat. That then draws us into another rabbit hole and another prolonged scenario. So I guess in the minute I have, I think starting with Dr. Rand, these scenarios that I'm laying out, are they inaccurate? And the questions that we should be thinking about and asking?
Sure. Obviously, none of this is clear, and the outcomes are not predetermined. This is a very difficult region. It's undergoing generational change in the form of the popular uprisings that have weakened state authority across the region. We don't need to get into here all of the factors that are making this an unprecedented moment in the region, and of course there's dangerous potential. But the strategy is trying to figure out the political endgame, as I said in the written testimony, in each of these particular theaters. And in Syria, the idea of inserting a trained, moderate opposition faction, 5,000 fighters, is smart because this is the type of fighters that we could ally with. These are the type of fighters that have a chance of reclaiming the territory once ISIS has been weakened in the areas.
But it will take time. It will take time to train, to equip, to create this capable fighting force. Ambassador Jeffrey, and again, as I'm thinking about this, am I thinking about this in the correct context?
Thank you, Dr. Bera, but
Thank you.
our time is going to be limited. Mr. Perry of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam